Right. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Connecticut's Old State House. My name is Mariana Garcia. I'm the Public Programs and Exhibits Manager here at the Old State House, and I want to thank you all for joining us today for tonight's program, Finding Common Ground, a Nonpartisan Conversation with Former Members of Congress. We're very happy to welcome our special guests tonight, former Representatives Loretta Sanchez and Fred Upton, who have come a very long way from California and Michigan, respectively, to be with us this evening. And we are also very excited to be partnering again with our longtime friends from the Dodd Human Rights Impact Programs at UConn to bring you this program. And I would especially like to thank Nana Amos, the Director of Community Outreach and Engagement at the Dodd, for reaching out to us to partner with this program. Thank you so much. And also to our friends from the Hartford Votes, Hartford Vota Coalition, and the CT League of Women Voters. The program today is all about communication, especially communication with those that we have differences with. Representatives Sanchez and Upton will share their perspectives on overcoming political polarization, fostering constructive dialogue, and working together for the common good. This conversation will provide valuable insights on how lawmakers and voters can bridge their divides and collaborate effectively amidst a highly charged political landscape. And this place, Connecticut's Old State House, is a site where many people with very, very different points of views on very important issues came together to discuss the future of the state of Connecticut. And some of their conversations were constructive, some were not, but I think that is why this is an excellent place to have a dialogue about the importance of finding common ground for the common good. So now allow me to introduce our two special guests, and we will start with a conversation with them. Okay, so former Congresswoman Loretta Sanchez is a Linwood, California native, graduated from Chapman University with a bachelor's in economics and later earned an MBA from American University. She served as a member of the U.S. House as a Democrat representing California's 46th congressional district. Sanchez assumed office on January 3rd, 2013 and left office in January 3rd, 2017. During her tenure in the House, Representative Sanchez established herself as an advocate for economic development, a strong military, homeland security, and education issues. In 2003, Loretta's sister Linda also won an election to the House, making them the first sister duo to serve concurrently in Congress. And former Congressman Fred Upton, who was proud to represent Southwest Michigan's 4th and 6th congressional district as a Republican from 1987 to 2023. Born in St. Joseph's, Michigan, he holds a bachelor's degree in journalism from the University of Michigan and became a sports editor. Prior to his election to Congress, Fred worked for President Ronald Reagan in the Office of Management and Budget. And while serving in Congress, Fred's top priorities were job creation, economic growth, and working to help all residents of Southwest Michigan live longer and better lives. Thank you both so much for joining us here in Connecticut today. And for everybody joining us online, if you do have any questions, please put them down in the comments section. And anybody here, if you have any questions, we will have a conversation at the very end. So we will get to your questions over at the end. All right, so why don't we start with the questions? And I would like to maybe start with a little setting of the ground. I would like to know why each of you decided to go into public service in the first place.
Okay, well, I represented Orange County for 20 years. Orange County is in California. It's where Disneyland is, Anaheim, California. So if you've been to the original Disneyland, you've been to my home city. It was a very difficult place to live if you were not, quite frankly, Anglo, male, Republican. We sent 6 people to the United States House of Representatives. At that time, it was all guys. It was all Republicans. And certainly nobody looked like me.
And they were all old, right?
Pretty much. So, but it wasn't about who represents. It's about how they represent. So I just felt like as a woman, as a Hispanic, nobody was talking and working on the issues that I cared about. So one day, whilst I was working on some education issues, I went to see my member of Congress, and he refused to meet with me. So I went home and I said to my family, I'm going to run for Congress. And I did, and I won. And you can't imagine the change or how crazy a time it was when a woman, a young woman, a Latina, a Democrat had beat the system, if you will. So I really went to Congress because I got mad, because I didn't know any better, that you're not supposed to win if you look like me or think like me. And more importantly, I went because I thought there needed to be somebody who was talking and working on issues that affected normal people like me. That's why. And it's the only political office I've held. I held it for 20 years. 6 years later, my sister came to the Congress. She continues to be there. She's in her 22nd year, running again for re-election. I have to tell you, as daughters of immigrant parents, both my parents are from Mexico, and they met in Los Angeles and had 7 children and educated them all. They're the only parents in the history of the United States to send 2 daughters to the United States Congress. So I think, it speaks to the beauty of America.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Pretty remarkable. She forgot to say that she won not only a tough Democratic primary, but then beat the incumbent Republican, which almost never happens, a challenger beating an incumbent. And so she had 2 tough, very tough races her first, and won handily, though she worked hard, in all of the other races that she had for Congress.
They were all difficult races.
Yeah.
Just like yours.
None of them are easy.
Nothing is
None
ever
are
easy. What about you? Why did you get it?
Well, I graduated from Michigan. I was not the sports editor at the Michigan Daily. And I thought that would be my profession. Nobody called. And I met a young man that was running for Congress. This was during the Watergate years. And I had never been to Washington. He was from my hometown, smart as can be. And I volunteered to help him. Very much like what we're encouraging, UConn is a sponsor of this, and Loretta and I have been at the UConn campus the last 2 days and encouraging students to participate in government, whether you're a candidate or certainly volunteering in all the different races that are out there. So I volunteered, and I was in charge of a couple of counties. We spooked out the member of Congress that was there, so we then had an open field. I think there were 8 people that ran. And the guy that I was working for won more than 50% of the vote. He won the primary. Then the district was solid Republican. It was probably like Orange County way before. And so I went to Washington. I was in charge of, in essence, constituent service. So it was a great job. I got to go home, back to Michigan whenever I wanted. And after 4 years, I was getting ready to have a new challenge. I thought about law school, a number of different things. I was working on my resume a Thanksgiving weekend after the election in 1980, and the phone rang. And I answered the phone. I said, "Good afternoon." It was a Sunday afternoon. "Good afternoon, Congressman Stockman's office. How can I help you?" And this voice said, "Is he there?" And I said, "No, sir, he's not." He said, "Well, this is Ronnie Reagan." I said, "Governor," because he wasn't president yet, "I know your voice. Congratulations." He said, "Do you think you can find your boss?" And I said, "I can. He lives next door to me on Capitol Hill." And I tracked him down, and he wanted to talk to him. He was offered a job in the cabinet, and I came shortly thereafter and really got my legislative experience, met my wife, ended up being in charge of the Legislative Affairs Office, had weekly meetings with the president, lobbied members of Congress on every issue with the exception of defense. And then people from back home they called and they said, "Fred, we'd like you to come back and run for the seat. Our congressman, his successor, is really not doing the job that he should be." And I saw that firsthand. And I said, I I'm pretty happy here. I get to see the president. I have mess privileges. I get all this stuff. I have 2 black labs, and I don't have any kids yet, but I'm happily married, still am. And I said no. And with that, a couple months later, they put a real press on me. And I went back, tested the waters, decided to run, and we beat the only incumbent to lose in the country. Our theme was, we can do better. And I never thought I would serve 36 years in the House. It was a great run. I had a wonderful staff, swing district, so every election was tough. I had a number of different primaries even later in my career because, I wasn't too far to the right. It's a moderate trying to get things done. But it was a great career, made a difference, and now the 2 of us are on the board of the former members of Congress, and this is one of the things that we do around the country to encourage young people, still think we're young, to be involved in politics because we need them at all levels. And we've had a great 2 days here in Connecticut and look forward to the future.
And to let people know kind of what really is going on, to show them that everything you see on TV is not real. I mean, people put the extremes of both parties on TV to, I don't know, have a showdown, scream and yell match, food fight, whatever you want to call it, because they think that people tune into that type of thing. But the reality is that good members of Congress, and there are a lot of good members, actually work together to try to get things done. And we want to let you know that too.
Excellent. That's exactly what we want people to walk out from this today with. But you mentioned younger people and encouraging younger people to become involved in government. Maybe because of what they see on TV and on social media, they just have the idea that it's fighting all the time. And for every little difference that you have with anybody, you have to defend and attack and be aggressive in order to defend your position. But what would you say, how would you define finding common ground in politics?
There's so many ways. I mean, first of all, let me tell you, I don't back down from a good fight. Once in a while, it's kind of fun, right? I mean, once in a while, it's kind of fun. I don't want to be doing it every day, but you just have to you really have to find common ground. And I gave this example earlier when we were over at University of Connecticut. There was this guy, Tancredo. He was a Republican, he was from Colorado, and he was the most anti-immigrant guy you can imagine. I mean, really, really bad guy on the immigration issue. And of course, excuse me, I'm Hispanic, Latina, Chicana, whatever you want to call me, right? And this issue is incredibly important, not just to Latinos in our country, but so many groups in our country. People who come here are part of our United States and really, really want to have status so they can live a peaceful life here. And we need them, right? So I'm fighting every single day to work on that. This Tancredo guy is doing everything opposite of what I'm trying to do. But here's the thing. One day we're on television. And we're on television because we have a bill that we have crafted together. It's a bill about making more nurses. Why? Because we need more nurses. We need more nurses in Colorado. We need more nurses in California. We probably need more nurses in most of the states, right? Across the board. And so he and I are working on this together. And we eventually passed it, so we're on TV and we're talking about it, how we're working together. Oh my gosh, after that interview, my BlackBerry, it was a BlackBerry at that time, starts just ringing and popping up and everything, and it's all these Latino activists going like, how could you possibly be working with Tancredo, you sellout? And I'm like, no, I'm not selling out. I don't like the guy with respect to his immigration views, but that doesn't mean he and I can't pass a bill together to make more nurses happen. That's what you have to do. You have to put aside, you have to think about which battle you're in today. And I learned this as a very young person. I had 6 brothers and sisters, right? And so on one day I'd be siding with a couple of my siblings and fighting some of the other siblings. And the next day, it'd be something else going on, and the same ones I was fighting against were now on my team, and we're fighting against the ones before. So coming from a large family, I learned how to think about the issue or the thing at hand, not whether I like you, or don't like you.
Yeah, and for me, so I had the privilege of working at the White House for 4.5 years, and we had some tough times in our country back in the late 70s and 80s, and President Reagan worked with the Democratic Congress. I was part of his team, and our relations, my boss who had been in the Congress, but I established a lot of relations with not only members but staff, followed issues that were important to the country, and at the end of the day, every president thinks that they're the greatest thing since sliced bread, let's face it. But the re-election is the verdict of how they did. Reagan won 49 states when he ran for re-election in '84. He won states like California, New York, Illinois, Massachusetts, states that a Republican today doesn't have a prayer of winning. And he won it because he got things done. He had great relations with Tip O'Neill, the Democratic Speaker of the House. He worked with the Senate. He got things done. It was the Cold War. It was the fall of the Berlin Wall. It was inflation. Go back 30, 40 years, and you can remember, those of you that are watching tonight, remember those days. And that was my model when I ran for Congress. I said, I'm there to make a difference, and I'm going to work with a Republican or a Democrat, whoever, on issues to try and get the bill done and to the president. And I'm not going to swing at windmills. I'm not going to be spending my time on issues that don't have a chance of getting done or I don't necessarily agree with. And at the end of the day, I was chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee. It's arguably the most powerful committee in the House, maybe not with all the missiles yet on armed services like you, but
there are some very
legislatively, we were number one, oldest committee in the House. And I had over 200 bills signed into law by the president, Obama, a Democrat, a Republican, and no one could match that because I worked with John Dingell, who was my former chairman. I worked with Frank Pallone, others. We were in the majority all those 6 years that I was chairman, but we had a Democratic president, and at the end of the day, we passed meaningful legislation that literally saved millions of lives in terms of what we did on health care. And it was bipartisan. And I had that same relationship with members of the Senate because, you can't just pass a bill in the House without getting the Senate to go along. We had a lot of members on Energy and Commerce that went to the Senate, great relations over there. Joe Biden, he was a huge help as vice president to get some of our pieces of legislation done. But again, it's the personal relationship that really people count on your word. And if they know that you're trying to do the right thing, they're going to be on board. And particularly when you pass a bill in our committee, 53-0, it gets the attention of the leadership on both sides saying, we need to do this.
Thank you so much. And, obviously there's things that every American cares about. And those are the issues that we can work together on most effectively. But how do we find those common values and goals in order to foster collaboration? So what techniques, what practices would you encourage in lawmakers in order to find that common ground and those common goals?
Well, I think one of the things that has happened in politics, especially at the national level, but I've seen it seep all the way down to the local level, is what I call the politics of personal destruction. The name calling, the calling out the families, this gun is aimed at you kind of stuff. There's no need for that in politics, right? Nancy Pelosi always told me from the very beginning, always keep a smile in your voice. You can be debating somebody, but always keep that smile in your voice. And what she meant was, don't go after somebody, don't make it a personal attack, talk about the facts, and work in that way. And, it's just like any of you. Do you want to work with somebody? Do you want to hang out with somebody who's always talking down on you and calling you names? Or do you want to work with somebody who's actually nice with you and you can get along with on a personal basis? I personally like to work with my friends and people that I like. I don't enjoy working with bullies or mean people or people calling me names. So, one of the things is get away from the destruction that happens with the personal politics.
So I got involved with a couple of groups, particularly after I was chairman of the committee. One of them was the Problem Solvers Caucus, a bipartisan group of 50 or 60 members. We met every week. Even during COVID, we'd have Zooms as we were back in our districts. Remember, you could vote by proxy back then if you had to. But this was a group of members committed on issues and working together. We met every Wednesday morning. We made a pledge that we wouldn't rat out what people said in the meeting, so there was never a charge, oh, she said this or that, or it was never used. We made a pledge that we would not do any campaign activity against anyone in the room. So you wouldn't sign a letter, you wouldn't do a political event. We all remember who sort of comes in and out. So that destroys a relationship when that happens. So we made that pledge. We made a pledge on civility, that we'd never attack each other privately or publicly. And we got things done. We actually passed an immigration bill relating to agriculture on the House floor. Couldn't get the Senate to do it. They sort of, a lot of excuses over there. We passed the infrastructure bill. We changed, and we paid for it. It was Governor Larry Hogan. He's now running for Senate. He was the governor of Maryland. He called about 24 of us up to his residence, and for 24 hours we met, Republicans and Democrats. We had some other governors, members of the Senate, member of the House. We defined what infrastructure was. We said, no, this is not entitlement spending, as Biden was proposing, which was part of his original package. But it's roads, it's infrastructure, it's bridges, it's broadband, it's lead in our water systems, an issue dear to my heart, coming from Michigan with Flint. We added money for that, and we paid for it. And at the end of the day, it passed in the Senate with 70-some votes, and we passed it in the House because of the Problem Solvers Caucus that got it done. We did the same thing with microchips. Michigan's the auto state. We were building, I went to the auto show with the president on Air Force One, and we saw parking lots filled with Ford 150s. They couldn't sell them. Why? They didn't have all the chips to do the electronics in the vehicles. They couldn't sell them until they got the chips. They had to have that chips bill so we could actually produce them in this country. And we provided the votes to get it. Mary Barra, the CEO of GM, when I showed up for the auto show in Detroit, she gave me a bear hug because of the vote that we had. But whether it's electronics, whether it's autos, whether it's appliances, whether it's our phones, you needed those chips, and it was bipartisan. So that Problem Solvers Caucus, particularly in a divided Congress like today, only a margin of 4 or 5 votes, we make the difference to try and get things done. No Labels has been another organization that's bicameral, which means the Senate's involved as well. They too were very involved in the infrastructure bill, the CHIPS bill, really focused on policy. They've been around since about 2008. I've been very involved with that group, and we were actually looking at a unity ticket, a Republican and a Democrat running in this election for president. But at the end of the day, we just sort of ran out of time. So that story's another day perhaps. But you got to work together. You got to build those relationships. That's what the country wants. I found, to close on this, my district said, we don't care if you have an R or a D next to your name for Republican or Democrat. Yeah, sure, we had some. Just get the job done. That's what we sent you to Washington to do. And by God, we have so many problems we have to deal with. It's time to stop kicking the can down the road. We need to deal with the debt and the deficit. We need to deal with entitlements. We need to deal with immigration reform. It was great news that the Fed dropped the interest rates last week. That's going to help everybody. I know there were some that thought it was political, so it shouldn't happen. No, it's too late. They should have done it a long time ago. So some rationale is coming, and I just hope that as you look at the next Congress, people get the idea of we can't wait years to get these issues done. Let's go to work today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And Congresswoman Sanchez, I'm remembering the Latinos that you mentioned that called you after you worked with your colleague from Colorado, saying, "Oh, how could you do this? How could you betray us like this?" So clearly, some people find it as a moral obligation to just be against people that you have just one little disagreement with, one thing, one difference. You have to like completely be against everything that they do. That is like their moral obligation to do to stand like this. What do you wish people? What do you like to say to people that think like that? How can we?
Well,
stay true to the moral obligation while still being true to yourself.
You know, I used to have always a young staff, right? Most of the staffers are young in Washington, D.C.
I'm still
That's
young.
why I always say to the young people out there, get on over to D.C., get yourself on a staff, volunteer, figure it out, go to the administration. With a change of administration going on, there's going to be lots of jobs open. You want to be in the thick of things? Get yourself to Washington, D.C., because there's so much opportunity. But I had these young staffers, and of course, one of the things you have to understand is the knives, again, Nancy Pelosi, the knives are long in the Congress, right? People love to stab you in the back. Sometimes I used to get sometimes more stabbed by Democrats than Republicans. It's just crazy. And, my staff used to be like so incensed when we'd figure out, somebody had messed with us, right? They'd be like, oh my gosh, this is terrible. I'm like, slow down. Just slow down here. We're just going to move forward. We're just going to get things done. We lost this battle, let's move to the next one. And I couldn't believe it. I mean, but they'd be like, how can you be like so staid about this? And just, and I said one time to my staffers, if I got mad and didn't talk to every person who had stabbed me in the back so far in this position, there'd be nobody I could work with, pretty much, right? Because people do that. It's just the nature. Sometimes they're just mean. Sometimes they just need their thing more than they think you need your thing. Sometimes they just want to win all the time, regardless of what the debris they leave in the street when they crush the rest of us. You just have to put that aside. Just put that aside. So when these Latino activists would say, this is terrible, or, how could you be a sellout? I'm not a sellout. I'm going to work on that issue. I'm going to get it done, or I'm going to work on it and try to get it done. But I'm not selling out on anything. I'm staying to my principles. And you have to have a thick skin. You really have to let bad things that happen most of the time just roll off of you and move forward. You're always going to get a chance to come back and work on that issue, at least in the Congress. I remember when I got to the Congress, and I was this young congresswoman, and I would go to the House floor, and I would see someone like a Frank or George Miller get up and talk about some subject on the House floor. And it was just like coming out of their mouths. They were so smart. They were so great. It was just amazing, right? And they'd come off from speaking, and I'd say to Barney Frank, or I would say to George Miller, oh my God, how do you know all that? It's just so amazing what you're doing. And they would laugh, and they would look at me and they'd go, Loretta, it's the same issues over and over. We've been here for 20 years. Next year, the issue's going to come up, maybe a little different flavor of it, but it's going to be the same issue we're going to be arguing. And sure enough, after 20 years of being there, I saw every single issue just keep coming back around, another bite at the apple, right? And I'd be up there and I'd be spouting whatever, and I'd come off the floor and some new freshman would say, oh my gosh, you're so good at this. I'm thinking, you know what? You're going to get a chance to work on this over and over again. And Congress works for most of the part in a very incremental way. It's very rare that some huge, big change happens. So to all these people who think, you have to be pure all day long, that's just not the way politics works.
You got to build relationships. And that's the only way to get things done.
Exactly. Thank you so much. So it's clear that there's just a narrative going on right now in politics in the United States that it's just fighting all the time. How can we start to move away from this narrative around political differences and how automatic conflict and just have to have a constructive communication? How can we break away from that narrative?
It'd be nice to see some campaign finance reform. I shared with Loretta just before we started a report that I saw online that there's a New York House race and it's going to break the records for spending $35 million. Whoa. My first race I was outspent 3-1. I spent maybe $150,000. Now that was in the 80s. So my last couple races were, again, I had a swing district, so more than sort of the safe districts that aren't impacted. But, for me, my goal was always family is first. I got 2 kids, now 4 grandkids, wonderful wife. Your job comes second. Make sure you're there voting and you're going back every weekend like Loretta did, me to Michigan. It actually was longer for me to get to Michigan than you to California because there's no direct flight for me to where I live and then an hour drive. And if you do those 2 right, your campaign's going to come along okay. That's where your focus ought to be. But now when you have to raise tens of millions of dollars, that comes at the expense of something else. Comes at the expense of building a relationship with someone, because again, if you're campaigning against someone, it's like, that's not a good thing, which is why, again, the Problem Solvers Caucus really did some good things. But somehow, you got to either shorten the campaigns, and, again, you have constitutional issues. I'm not a lawyer. You got to figure out how we get away from people having to raise, tens of millions of dollars every 2 years. I mean, that's why you did run for the Senate. I thought about it a couple times, but I thought, raising that much money, it's going to come I said, I'm not going to do it.
And I did, and I loved it.
Yeah, I know. And it would have been nice not to run for re-election every 2 years and do it 6. And, frankly, I think it ought to be a 4-year term in Congress, not 2. But it could never happen because the senators would never say, oh, yeah, you're going to get a free pass against me? No way. We're going to stick with the founding fathers, and you're never going to get a 2/3 vote to do that. But, it really is getting out of hand. And the frustration is there, as we both watch Congress from the outside now. And I texted a colleague a little bit earlier today and said, wow, what a dysfunction. They're getting out of session, weeks early. They haven't gotten their job done, and I don't know what they're going to campaign on, not a lot. We know it's going to be a close election, but what a dysfunctional mess. And He agreed. He absolutely agreed. And they all know that, but we need some changes. And so the voters have to make that change. And frankly, I think in one of the ideas we talked at UConn earlier, and I'll close on this, is a jungle primary. You have that in California, where you have, in Michigan, our primary's in August, and you have a 15% of the vote turnout, maybe, so 7% wins because you got third-party candidates, and it's a tough time. If you have a jungle primary, you take the top 2 people, regardless of party, and that then excludes the fringes, the folks that might otherwise get 8% of the vote and be able to knock somebody off. Another idea is the ranked voting, which is a little more complicated. I know they have that in some states like Maine. But that will put more of the middle in for voters to decide how are we going to work together versus some of these, I'll call them outcasts, so radical left or right, that really have got a stranglehold on the leadership on both sides.
Wonderful, thank you. And perhaps we can talk a little bit about how did we get here? What are the skills that you see are missing in Congress and people that are working in government? What are they not doing? What are they not seeing?
Well, one of the things I've been told, and I wasn't watching the Congress because, remember, I got mad and I decided to run for the Congress, and there I was. But right before that, there was this guy named Newt Gingrich. And I am told by my colleagues, at least on the Democratic side, the ones who were around then, see, the Democrats controlled the House of Representatives for 40 years. And with good margins. I mean, not like the 5 difference we have now. At times it was 40 seats, or, so the bulls of the Congress, the chairman of the committees and stuff, they practically were like demigods walking around, right? And they got a little out of control. I mean, they didn't think anything could touch them, and there were some scandals and things like that. So there was this guy named Newt Gingrich, and he used to get up, and C-SPAN came into play, the camera that shows what's going on in the chamber. And Newt Gingrich got up there at night when nobody was in the chamber, and the camera was on him, and he'd pretend like he was talking to a full chamber full of Congress people because nobody was there because it was midnight or something, and he's talking away. And he was the one credited with starting the personal attacks on people. Just over and over every night going after members of Congress who were sitting there and, talking bad about them and what they had done wrong, and they're just terrible and we got to get them out, and, over and over and over and over. Well, guess what? In 1994, the House flipped by a huge amount. There were like 80 or 90 seats changed. And the Democrats, after having 40 years of punitive control, all of a sudden were on the outs. And now the Republicans, for the first time, were taking over. And Newt Gingrich got put in as Speaker, right? So he was rewarded for his night after night after night of attacks. Those attacks scared people because they saw this incredible flip go on. Now members, instead of staying in Washington, D.C., and building relationships with the opposite party and everybody, soon as votes were done, would rush home to campaign every single day for 2 years, so they would make sure that personal attacks wouldn't get them out of office. And so this dynamic changed. That's how it happened. Newt Gingrich, personal attacks, and a lack of time to get to know your fellow colleagues of both parties, because now you felt like you had to be home protecting your home turf. That's what I attribute it to.
Yeah, that and the whole campaign finance issue. Again, I was one of John McCain's national chairs. And he had the, tell straight express something along those lines. And, he pushed hard on campaign finance reform. I supported it. But sadly, some of the judges knocked some of it out. But it would have been real reform. And we are left with what we have today, which is, pretty rough.
Thank you. All right. So what can voters do then? What can voters and citizens do to actively participate and encourage the representative to find that common ground and to do the work and be constructive?
We'll have to understand what really goes on in politics. To understand it, you got to go in, you got to volunteer in a campaign, you got to see what it's about, you got to work on an issue, you got to go in and talk to your representative, you've got to get a groundswell towards moving an issue. I mean, they have to actively see what the whole game, if you will, is. More importantly, not just get involved like that, they have to decide that they're going to hold people accountable. They're going to get educated about who said what. They're going to hold people accountable when they tell the lies. There's so many lies told now by people. I see politicians get up there and oh yeah, the grass is purple. It's like, no, the grass isn't purple. Oh, the grass is purple, and then you say it long enough, people are saying, oh yeah, the grass is purple. It's like, what are you talking about? So, people, the voter has to hold the politician accountable. They have to get involved in the process. They have to run themselves. They have to get to Washington. They have to involve themselves in the process. We need people with energy, with desire, with new ideas to actually get into the process. There's so many ways. Get appointed, get elected, work on campaigns, go into the civil service, and work as a government official. If you want to see change, change has got to come from you. It's not going to come from the people who are currently in power. Not going to happen. They're in power and they like to be kept in power.
So remember, each member of Congress represents 750,000 people. You know, for me, it was about 100 different communities. I had 6 counties. Loretta had the same number of people, but she had 1 county, maybe a fifth of the county or something like that. You know, travel distances. But yeah, members have to be accountable, but that's why groups like League of Women Voters, which is a sponsor tonight, universities, it needs to be more than just at election time, right? You want access. People want to weigh in. You need the town meetings, the teletown meetings that are going on now. You need the forums. You need the transparency. You also need the local press. And sadly, remember, I was a journalism major, and we had a wonderful discussion today with Amber Diaz, right, from NBC, which is a local, she was the moderator at UConn today. But, you know, our local press isn't as vigilant as they were not too many years ago. People knew they had you know, your newspapers even had, here's how they voted, and they would take the key votes for the week, and, you know, whether it be Ukraine or whatever it might be, here's how you voted, so people could see and track that. Don't have that today. You know, my newspaper today, I mean, they've cut back, they don't even publish Sunday or Monday. It used to be a couple of different sections. It might be 4 pages now in one section. You know, there's no, I mean, you just don't have it. Yeah, you have the national stuff, but in terms of, you know, what are people really thinking in Hartford or St. Joe, Michigan, or, you know, you don't have that local accountability. And many of the press, I mean, they found they're pretty young, which is a good thing, but they don't have the tenure or the experience to be able to hold members of Congress. They can run over them, and I'll say blindside, but they can cover up on the issues where they might want to be held accountable. You just don't have that. So that's part of the issue as well.
And young people get a lot of their news from their friends.
Yeah, or they don't read newspapers. A lot of them don't watch TV anymore.
Of course not.
Except
what
the
they
NFL.
do is they say TikTok and Instagram, and it's something sent from their friends, and that friend got it from somebody else, who got it from somebody else, who got it from somebody else, and the stuff that they're showing is just, it's garbage. It's not even true. So I would say the young people in particular are the ones here. You know, you're going to UConn for a reason. You're smart. My gosh. Be smart about where you get your information. And your friends aren't necessarily that smart, you know? So don't listen to the stuff they're forwarding to you. It's just not true most of the time. Do your homework. If you want to be informed, if you want to be a part of the solution, then get informed. Get informed the right way, not from a video that got sent, that got pushed to 20 people or 20,000 people. Wrong. It's wrong. I mean, I see my nieces. It drives me crazy. I just want to take their phone and throw it across, smash it across the wall. Really, you're watching that? You're from a political family. There are 2 congresswomen in your family, and you don't understand that the stuff but it's so funny, Auntie Lolo, they say to me. Oh my gosh, well, funny is not part of this.
That's funny. Your friends are not that smart. All right, well, maybe you could point us to some some examples of your successful bipartisanship successes that maybe you could serve as a model for how some people, you know, can find that constructive dialogue.
Well, I was on the Armed Services Committee, and typically the Armed Services Committee is supposed to be as bipartisan, they say, as possible, right? Because it's about supporting our troops, and it's about not sending anyone into harm's way unless you really have to, and all this type of thing. Okay, whatever, but you still have big divides sometimes. I mean, Mike Turner, who was the Congress member, he's now the Intel the chair, of the Intelligence Committee, all the top secret stuff, right? But he was on the Armed Services Committee with me. He was my counterpart. He was, when we were in control, very few years, I would be the chairman. When he was in control, many, many years, he would be the chairman, right? But we would always work together, and we worked together really well. I went to his weddings. I vacationed with him and his kids. We actually got along. That doesn't mean we had huge divides sometimes on issues. Nuclear proliferation, so the making of more nuclear bombs, he was always for more, I was always for less. I mean, it couldn't be a bigger divide on that. We still managed to work on some issues, even in that arena, that we could work on together. But I was very concerned about the military rapes happening. So this is a big scandal. Military men raping our military women. So totally unacceptable. Just on the face of it, think of it. But it was happening. And year after year, there'd be a new scandal. Aberdeen, the young cadets at the Air Force Academy. Coast Guard. This went on and on, year after year. Okay, it's done. I said it's done. We need to change. The military has its own set of laws. They don't work under civilian laws. They work under something called the Uniform Code of Military Justice, the UCMJ. So I proposed, imagine this is so novel. I proposed that the military laws mirror the laws that we had at the federal level and 37 other states that said if you raped a woman and you got caught at it, it was a crime. Because that's not what the UCMJ said when I started working on this. So I called in the military guys who do all of the JAGs, right? The guys who do all the military law and stuff. And I had a talk with them. I said, my proposal is to change the UCMJ code, this particular one, and put this in as a crime. Oh my gosh, we can't do that. We never change the UCMJ. Well, why don't you change the UCMJ? Well, because we got this red book that is the operating procedures for us about how we do criminal courts and all sorts of things. It's how we operate, and we would have to change the red book. I'm like, okay, and how long would it take to change the red book if we change the sexual assault law in the military code? They said, it would take at least 6 months to change the red book. I said, okay, let's pass the law, and we'll make it active 6 months after we pass it. And these guys were like, this is terrible. And I finally stood up. We were in my office, said, you know what? It's obvious to me you've never been raped. So you don't understand how important this issue is. You can leave now. It took me 7 years. And Mike Turner was one of the biggest proponents with me to change the UCMJ, to make it reflect closer to what was going on in our Title 18, I think it was, of our federal laws. And like I said, 37 other states copy the same thing. And it was the first major reform to the military, the UCMJ, in over 60 years. It took us 7 years. And when I left, Mike was still fighting. He found Gillibrand of New York in the Senate, and they continued to push this issue of people should be held accountable for sexual assault in our military. That's one example of what we worked on.
That was great. I was glad to support that change. So I worked on a lot of pieces of legislation, as chairman, and helped shepherd them through. But as I reflect back, clearly it was 21st century cures. So I was chairman again from 2010 to 2016, and in 2013 we started, so a 3-year effort. We started on legislation to speed up, expedite the approval of drugs and devices. We learned that our drug companies were getting their approvals overseas, and that's where they then manufacture them, and we were at a disadvantage. And so we worked on that, and I had a great partner, Diana DeGette, a Democrat from Colorado, And together we shepherded, and we coupled it with $45 billion more in health research money. And since then, a cure for cancer, sickle cell is now, we can cure it because of this legislation. But as you look back, it was the last bill that President Obama signed into law. We passed it 392 to 26 on the House floor. I did keep a list of the 26 that voted no. One died of cancer since then. 92 to 8 in the Senate. Joe Biden was a terrific help. That's where he got the cancer moonshot, was part of that bill. But so 2016 it passed. Fast forward, 2020, COVID. I happened to have a Pfizer facility in my district, and they began to work on the COVID vaccine. J&J in Ohio. They were able to, and I sat down with them, literally at picnic tables outside because it was COVID, you had to be separated. They started working then on distributing the vaccine, and when the FDA approved it in December of 2020, they were able to already have produced and packaged it and had the shipping. Remember, it had to be like 30 degrees below zero in these coolers. So they had to build the coolers. They got all the dry ice you could buy in the Midwest. And literally the day it was approved was the day that FedEx and UPS began to ship it across the country. And we were able to distribute it probably 6 or 8 months before it otherwise would have happened had we not gotten that bill done, which literally saved 1 million American lives. That was a great, it was hailed as one of the most significant pieces of legislation passed in the decade. But, I was later, my last year of Congress in 22, I actually went to Laos and Vietnam, and I saw a shipment come in from Pfizer to help the people. Africa, we sent it to Botswana and other countries as well. But, we really saved the world with that legislation, and it was, again, it was a great piece of legislation where, at one point it was in trouble. I actually adjourned the markup because I didn't know that we could get the votes to get it done, and at the end of the day, we got it 53-0 in the committee, but that vote helped propel it through the House. Our leadership on both sides, Pelosi, Steny Hoyer, Kevin McCarthy, Steve Scalise, Ryan was Speaker at the beginning of the term. Remember, it was a 3-year effort, but we got it done. And Lamar Alexander in the Senate, and Mitch McConnell and others were terrific to get it. And that's what you want to see happen as you deal with these issues. Work together, accomplish something, and then you move on to the next issue.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. The mountains you can move when you work together, right? All right, so this is important. I'd like to talk a little bit about how we can set boundaries when it's clear that the conversation is not going anywhere, that the dialogue is just too toxic, not being constructive at all. How do you set your boundaries and respectfully
Well, that's why
away?
The Problem Solvers Caucus, we took the civility pledge. And, at one point, we had a good friend of both of ours, Debbie Dingle. She actually set up retreats where you take your family, you take your spouse. They were bipartisan. I had kids, so, they would go and they would, they had a pool where you went and other places. It was not paid for at taxpayer expense. But it was just a way to get to know people. And if you get to know them, chances are you're not going to attack them. This week, this is being taped, I know, but this week there was a terrible incident on the floor. A former colleague, and he went after Haitians and called them thugs and just awful language. He put it on his Twitter account. It was in social media. And he got called out for it, rightly so. And rightly so, he pulled it back, but he didn't apologize. And when Congress comes back, I think there's going to be an effort to censure him, as there should be. I cast 20-some thousand votes. And I can remember President Trump went after 4 of our colleagues, African-American, all 4. And he told them to go back to, this is his quote, "Go back to your shithole country." Awful. And there was a vote that we had to condemn his language. Not to fine him financially or, but just say, this has got to stop. It was a fairly easy to remember. I'm not a lawyer. One pager of, this is, not called for, shouldn't happen to anybody. These are Americans. They're serving their districts. They've been elected. They've been reelected now. And President Trump called me. He said, Fred, I call all of our presidents Mr. President. I'd like you to vote no. I said, Mr. President, I can't. I said, I read the resolution. I know these 4 people, not very well, but I said, I've spent a little time talking to private sector. I talked to some CEOs of Fortune 100 companies this week, and I'm a big sports fan. I talked to the MLB, Major League Baseball, and there was a pitcher that was on the Dodgers then, is by the name of Yu Darvish. Later he's on my team, the Cubs, and he's, obviously Japanese descent. And somebody gave him a bad gesture from a dugout. Slant eyes is what they did. And you know what? That ball player that did it, he got suspended for like 2 weeks. 2 weeks without pay. Now, for a ball player, that's a lot of money. That's a couple $100,000. But they sent a signal that that's not acceptable. When I talked to my corporate executives who came in to see me, I said, what if one of your board members did something like this? They'd give them the heave-ho. It's not going to happen. So I said, Mr. President, I'm sorry, but you got to stop this. I didn't say crap, but I should have, maybe. But it's got to end. And so from the top to the bottom, and, I had a lot of, I agreed with President Trump on a number of issues, but so many people said, I wish he'd just take that phone of his and drop it in a bucket of water instead of sending some of these tweets out, because it helps promote the antagonism, the hatred, and sadly, the violence that we've seen. It's just got to end, and it's got to start at the top. That example's got to be set.
Thank you.
I would just say that true leadership is about calling people out when they've said the wrong thing or done the wrong thing, and people just need to start getting spines and do that. That's what we need. We need real leaders.
Thank you so much. And then sort of to start wrapping things up, after we're done with our conversation up here, we're going to start having some roundtable discussions. Since there's not many people, maybe we can consolidate a couple of tables. But to sort of wrap our conversation up here, could you tell us how, obviously, you're part of the Former Members of Congress Association, and this is what you do. How can former and current politicians encourage the younger generations to engage in constructive political dialogue, and rather than resort to division as a first instinct?
In California, at least, most of the curriculum over the last 10 or 20 years has been about role playing, how to agree to disagree, how to bring down, high levels of conflict, how to work with each other. I'm really looking forward for young people to supposedly who've gone through this training now in elementary and middle and high school, about how to deflate, bring down the high tensions, and really talk to each other. I'm looking for them to get into politics, for them to become staffers, for them to get into the civil service arena, to work as our federal workers, because hopefully they're bringing the skill set that was never taught to me or to my generation in the elementary and high school arena. We were never taught how to constructively work with each other in that way. So I'm hoping that they bring that set of skills with them.
So one of the really nice things, we're both on the board of the Former Members of Congress. It's a non-paid position. And one of the objectives is to really talk about bipartisanship, try to encourage our young to think about a career in public service, whether they be in the State Department or the Congress or D.C. or the administration, or run for office, maybe a city council member like Nick, who's with us today, a good man that we met a little bit earlier today. And so literally 90 universities or so every year have said, we'd like to participate. And UConn was one that was witnessed this program a little bit last year, and they said, we'd like that to happen. So I think we're the first folks that have done it at UConn, but I've done a number of universities. We both traveled overseas to do this. It's amazing how foreign students know so much about American government and different players that are there. I mean, they know the acronyms AOC and MTG, where I'm not so sure that all of our high school kids would. But, you know, this is something that we want this country to work. And even though we're not there, it doesn't mean that we can't have some influence on our successors. Whether it be climate change or all these different issues, we need young people, and that's what this is all about. So we were delighted to be asked to come up and spend 2 days here in Hartford and you know, pass out that message. But we got a lot of colleagues who are doing this across the country as well, and we're going to continue to participate.
And I think it's not just the young people, it's communities. I think people out here are really interested to know what's really happening. I think they've begun to realize they don't believe what's going on TV. So they ask me all the time, is that really true, Loretta, or what's really happening? People stop me all the time. And if I have the time, I sit down and talk to them and explain, no, most people are working on this. This is how you get involved. Please do. And I think when we take the time, our democracy is only as good as the amount of time that we put into it. It's like anything else. You're growing a plant. If you disregard it, it's going to die. You're in a marriage. If you disregard it, it's going to die. You know, you got a kid. You sit him in front of the TV and you never interact with him. You know what happens. You probably don't get the kid you thought you wanted, right? So it's the same with democracy. We want the democracy that we want. We got to put the effort into it.
Wonderful. That's a wonderful place to end our conversation. I want to thank you both, Representative Upton and Sanchez, for a wonderful conversation. And everybody.
Thank you.